So today I want to talk about how the United States is in very, very big trouble, past and present, morally speaking. There have been preachers out there in the past, some 30, 40, 50, 60 plus years ago, who were claiming that the white race are the real Israelites, and that among them was the Armstrong crowd. Herbert Armstrong even claimed that the United States was Manasseh, that Great Britain was Ephraim, that France was Reuben, etc., etc., etc. Now, that is contrary to the scriptures. And I will get started. We'll start somewhere else here. I'll get to this in just a minute. Scattered among the nations, right? You can see all these scriptures where it talks about how Israel and Israelites were scattered among the Gentiles. Scattered does not mean they were in one place. Scattered means scattered. So that on its face, Herbert Armstrong's theory of European nations being Israelite nations, was that whole idea is diametrically opposite to what the scripture says. Who are these nations in Europe then? They're mostly of Japheth. Not of Shem, but Japheth. For example, the Irish would be of Riphath, a son of Japheth, who's either son or grandson of Japheth. And much of Europe, not all of it, much of Europe, Ashkenaz. This is the reason why European Jews, or Jews that were scattered among the Europeans, are called Ashkenazi Jews. Because Ashkenaz is the Jewish way of saying European. Now, of course, Spain is Tarshish, or the lower end of Spain and Portugal is Tarshish, while the upper end is probably Ashkenaz. But I'm not going to go into all that today. What I'm going to do, folks, is this. I'm going to start off with Margaret Sanger. The Jesuit Review. The Jesuit Review? Really? All right. So who is this guy, John Conley? I guess this is a Catholic. This is a Catholic publication, and I am not. Well, I see all these different. Who is this guy, John Conley? Let me go look at it. Yeah, he's a Jesuit. Okay. Now, what he says here in this part is accurate. Now, those of you who watch my videos know that I have more than just one bone to pick with the Catholics. But let's do this here. Let's read what he has to say here. The French have a word for it. Debaptizer. A prominent French scientist, Alexis Carrel, won the Nobel Prize for his inventions. His work saved military and civilian lives during both world wars. After his death, the grateful nation baptized the medical school of Lyon as Alexis Carrel University. In the 1990s, however, critics recall that Carrel had been an ardent eugenicist. In his book Man of the Unknown, 1935, Carrel recommended the use of gas chambers to deal with criminals and the insane. In 1936, preface to the German edition, he praised the new National Socialist government eugenics policy of forced sterilization. The French government quickly debaptized Alexis Carrel University and rebaptized it in the name of whatever this name is, the uncontroversial inventor of the stethoscope. In our nation, the work of debaptism continues apace as we confront our racist history. Calhoun Hall at Yale has been renamed. Senator and Vice President John Calhoun was an ardent defender of slavery and white supremacy. Georgetown recently removed the names of Tom Moletti and William McSherry from campus buildings since both Jesuits had been prominent in the sale of slaves to distant southern plantations in 1838, which is why I have to ask anyone, why then would they call themselves a Jesuit today? But that's a whole nother subject. As we purify our national memory, I would like to nominate my own candidate for debaptism, Sanger Square in Manhattan, named after Margaret Sanger, the founder of Birth Control League, the future Planned Parenthood. The square honors of an improbable feminist icon who championed a coercive brand of eugenics. Sanger's eugenics creed is clearly stated in her speech, "My way to peace." Her way to peace, huh? Well, folks, the scripture says anytime they say peace, then comes war or sudden destruction. And as you notice, she released this book in 1932, and what happened in the late 1930s? Did she have anything to do with it? Centerpiece of the program in vigorous state use of compulsory sterilization and segregation. The first class of persons targeted for sterilization is made up of people with mental or physical disability. Now, I don't want to get into the politics of this here, folks, but you see, a member of my family was born with a physical disability right around the time when Hillary Clinton was First Lady of the United States, and in her health care plan were two things that were documented by the Cerebral Palsy Foundation, and those two things were, number one, that no doctor would be allowed to practice outside the health care plan. The second one was that those who were born with physical disabilities or that were terminally ill would not receive health care. That, folks, is eugenics. And I hated Hillary Clinton for that. I despised her for it. She became my mortal enemy. And those who how do I say this? Profited off of being her friend, I find genuinely suspect. Among them, the current President of the United States. Because eugenics in America started the Holocaust. Now, if you don't believe it, you just wait. You just wait, because I've got an article for you. Just give me a few minutes. I'll go through some of this here, and then I'll go to the next article. Yes, the first class of persons targeted for sterilization is made up of people with mental or physical disability. The first step would be to control the intake and output on morons, mental defects, epileptics. A much larger class of undesirables would be forced to choose either sterilization or placement in state work camps. Now remember, this was just before Adolf Hitler, who came up with this way of thinking. Let's dig a little deeper, shall we? The second step would be to take an inventory of the second group, such as illiterates, paupers, unemployables, criminals, prostitutes, dope fiends, classify them in special departments under government medication program or medical program, and segregate them on farms and open spaces. Those segregated in these camps could return to mainstream society if they underwent sterilization and demonstrated good behavior. Right. Sure. You actually believe that? Let's stop right here for just a second and read this. Matthew 7 and verse 15, beware of false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing. And I've told you those are your false preachers that have been preaching to you for the last couple of millennia. But inwardly they are ravening wolves. You shall know them by their fruits. So everyone you will know by their fruits. Men do not gather grapes from thorns or figs from thistles. Even so, every good tree brings forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree brings forth evil fruit. So I go back to Margaret Sanger here, and I ask the question again. Those segregated in those camps could return to mainstream society if they underwent sterilization and demonstrated good behavior. Really? Do you actually believe that? Please don't be a fool. Sanger estimates that 15 million to 20 million Americans will be targeted in this regime of forced sterilization and concentration camps. Now, what were the numbers of the United States of America in 1932? Let's find out. 1932 American census population. No, I don't want it by state. $124 million people. That's it. So they were talking, folks. Listen to this. Between 15 and 20 million people. That is a major chunk. That would be about 1/6 of the population that they would be just cutting out and placing in concentration camps. In Sanger, the humanitarian dream of a world without poverty and illness has deteriorated into a coercive world where the poor, the disabled, and the addicted simply disappear. All right. Sanger's eugenic projects carried its own racial preoccupation. In the letter of December 10, 1939, notice the timing here, to Clarence Gamble, she explained the nature of her organization's outreach to the African American community. The most successful educational approach to the Negro is through religious appeal. We don't want the word to get out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. Now, just so you know, Margaret Sanger is the founder of Planned Parenthood. Abortion is one of the central doctrines of the current Democrat Party today. And the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members. In her autobiography, she proudly recounts her address to the women of the Ku Klux Klan in Silver Lake, New Jersey in 1926. Dethroning a cultural idol like Sanger is not easy, and the problem goes deeper than the link between her birth control movement and the sexual revolution. Sanger represents a genteel prejudice shared by many members of America's ruling class in the early 20th century. To face squarely the glacial eugenics of Sanger, one must demythologize the progressive movement's pantheon. Theodore Roosevelt, who staunchly supported the eugenics movement of the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratories; Woodrow Wilson, who as governor of New Jersey signed a law in 1911 mandating the forced sterilization of the feeble-minded; and Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who in the Buck versus Bell case in 1927 declared forced sterilization statutes are constitutional. Really? Such biases have consequences. At least 60,000 American citizens were sterilized against their will under the weight of such mandates. I wonder if I messed up a... Yeah, no, I did not, so I'll continue. When we improbably debaptized Sanger Square, I proposed a new baptismal name, that of Carrie Buck, the woman, Virginia woman, whose fate as a sterilized victim was sealed by the 1927 court decision. The state of Virginia had condemned feeble-minded as incorrigible, as sexually promiscuous. She was in fact a C pupil, only mildly disruptive in class. She was not really disruptive at all. And the child she bore out of wedlock was a result of being raped by the nephew of her foster parents. All right, where am I going with this, folks? I have said over and over and over again that my website is all about Israel. Didn't I? Yes, I did. I'm getting there. Please be patient. For all our current efforts to face the destructive biases of our history, we find it difficult to admit, let alone condemn, our long-standing hostility toward people with disabilities and to confront those elites who have fostered that contempt. Our cult of Margaret Sanger is a sign of that enduring refusal. All right. Now, I know, folks, I'm reading off of a Jesuit platform here. But it's only a small platform. This one, is it this one? This one. This is the article that I want to read to you. That should make every American citizen shake in their boots. Fasten your seatbelts. The Horrifying American Roots of Nazi Eugenics. This is by Edwin Black. Edwin Black, he is the author of IBM and the Holocaust. and also the book War Against the Weak, Eugenics and America's Campaign to Create a Master Race. Hitler and his henchmen victimized an entire continent and exterminated millions in his quest for the so-called master race. But the concept of a white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed master Nordic race didn't originate with Hitler, as you just found out. The idea was created in the United States and cultivated in California decades before Hitler came to power. California eugenicists played an important, although little-known role in America's eugenics movement campaign for ethnic cleansing. I'm getting there, folks. Please be patient. You'll see. Eugenics was the racist pseudoscience determined to wipe away all human beings deemed unfit, preserving only those who conform to a Nordic stereotype, which, of course, you know, folks, I do not fit that stereotype, if you couldn't tell already. Elements of the philosophy were enshrined as national policy by forced sterilization. Did you get that? Where have we heard that before? Oh, in the previous article. And segregation laws, as well as marriage restrictions. That's when marriage licenses started in the United States, which years ago, not many years ago, but years ago, I condemned as something that is unconstitutional. Marriage licenses. Enacted in 27 states. In 1909, California became the third state to adopt such laws. Ultimately, eugenics practitioners coercively sterilized some 60,000 Americans, barred the marriage of thousands, forcibly segregating thousands in colonies. Yes, folks, it started here. What started here? You'll see. And persecuted untold numbers in ways we are just learning. Before World War II, nearly half of coercive sterilizations were done in California. And even after the war, the state accounted for a third of all such surgeries. California was considered an epicenter of America's eugenics movement. During the 20th century, first decades, California's eugenicists included the potent but little-known rare race scientists such as Army venereal disease specialist Dr. Paul Popenoe, citrus magnate and Polytechnic benefactor Paul Gosney, Sacramento banker Charles M. Goethe, as well as members of the California State Board of Charities and Corrections and the University of California Board of Regents. Eugenics would have been so much bizarre parlor talk had it not been for extensive financing by corporate philanthropies, specifically the Carnegie Institution, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Harriman Railroad fortune. They were all in league with some of America's most respected scientists hailing from such prestigious universities as Stanford, Yale, Harvard, and Princeton. These academicians espoused race theory and race scientists and then faked and twisted data to serve eugenics racism aims. Stanford President David Starr Jordan originated the notion of race and blood. Sounds a whole lot like iron and blood, or blood and iron. But anyway, I digress. In his 1902 racial epistle, Blood of a Nation, in which the university scholar declared that human qualities and conditions such as talent and poverty were passed through the blood. In 1904, The Carnegie Institution established a laboratory complex at Cold Springs Harbor on Long Island that stockpiled millions of index cards on ordinary Americans, Big Brother, as researchers carefully plotted the removal of families, bloodlines, and whole peoples. Well, that's exactly what the communists were doing in Russia. And a little bit later, that's exactly what Hitler was doing in Europe. Let me finish here, folks. From Cold Springs Harbor, eugenics advocates agitated in the legislatures of America, as well as the nation's social services agencies and associations. The Harriman Railroad fortune paid local charities such as the New York Bureau of Industries and Immigration to seek out, here we go, folks, Jewish, Italian, and other immigrants in New York and other crowded cities and subject them to deportations, trumped up confinement, or forced sterilization. Oh, we're not done here, folks. The Rockefeller Foundation helped found the German eugenics programs and even funded the program that Joseph Mengele worked in before he went to Auschwitz. Now you see where this is going. Much of the spiritual guidance and political agitation for the American eugenics movement came from the California quasi-autonomous eugenics societies such as Pasadena-based Human Betterment Foundation and the California branch of the American Eugenics Society, which coordinated with much of their activity with the Eugenics Research Society in Long Island. These organizations, which function as part of a closely knit network, publish racist eugenic newsletters and pseudo-scientific journals such as Eugenical News and Eugenics, and propagandized for the Nazis. Eugenics was born as a scientific curiosity in the Victorian age. In 1863, Sir Francis Galton, a cousin of Charles Darwin, theorized that if talented people only married other talented people, that the result would be measurably better offspring. As of course, we all know that to be absolutely pure nonsense today. But anyway, I will continue. At the turn of the last century, Galton's ideas were imported into the United States, just as Gregor Mendel's principles of hereditary were discovered. American eugenics advocates believe with religious fervor that the same Mendelian concepts determine the color and size of peas and corn and cattle, also govern the social and intellectual character of a man. In an America demographically reeling from immigration upheaval and torn by post-Reconstructionist chaos, racial conflict was everywhere in the early 20th century. Elitist utopians and so-called progressives, folks, you who call yourselves progressives today, might want to look in your past and have a look. Might want to take a peek. Look at the man in the mirror and see what you really are. Fuse their smoldering race fears and class bias with their desire to make a better world. They reinvented Galton's eugenics into a repressive and racist ideology. The intent: populate the earth with vastly more of their own socioeconomic and biological kind and less or none of everyone else. The superior species the eugenics movement sought was populated not merely by tall, strong, talented people. Eugenicists craved blonde, blue-eyed Nordic types. This group alone, they believed, was fit to inherit the earth. Interesting. In the process, the movement intended to subtract, number 1, emancipated Negroes, number 2, immigrant Asian laborers, number 3, Indians, number 4, Hispanics, number 5, East Europeans, number 6, Jews, number 7, dark-haired hill folk. I know about those, the hillbillies. Poor people, the infirmed, and really anyone classified outside the gentrified genetic lines drawn up by American raceologists. How? By identifying so-called defective family trees and subjecting them to lifelong segregation and sterilization programs to kill their bloodlines. The grand plan was to literally wipe away the reproductive capability of those deemed weak and inferior, and all Israel. Let's be honest about it. This was hatched in the United States of America. Deemed weak and inferior, the so-called unfit, the eugenicists hoped to neutralize the viability of 10% of the population at a sweep until none were left except themselves. And I don't know if I can see. I've got to read this because what is happening today, I have been accusing these people who, what is this? Is it right here? Gain of function research. I'll go into that in just a minute. I've been accusing the people who promote gain of function research of modern day eugenics that is happening right now. What am I saying? I'm going to keep reading this and then I'll stop where it applies to this gain of function research. Let's see here. 18 solutions were explored in a Carnegie-supported 1911 preliminary report of the Committee of the Eugenics section of the American Breeders Association to study and to report on the best practical means for cutting off the defective germplasm in the human population. Point 8 was euthanasia. That's right, murder. Point 8 was murder. The most commonly suggested method of eugenicide in America was a lethal chamber or publicly, locally operated gas chambers. You proud to be an American? Are you sure? In 1918, Popenoe, the Army venereal disease specialist during World War I, co-wrote and widely used textbook Applied Eugenics, which argued from a historical point of view the first method which presents itself is execution. Execution? Execution, folks. Its value in keeping up the standard of the race should not be underestimated. Applied Eugenics also devoted a chapter to lethal selection. No, I did not misinterpret this word execution, folks. They really meant it. Lethal selection, which operated through the destruction of the individual by some adverse feature of the environment, such as excessive cold. What? excessive cold, or bacteria, or by bodily deficiency? Do you mean to tell me that these eugenicists were dreaming of ways to weaponize coronaviruses as a means of eugenics since as far back as the early 1900s? We'll stop right here for just a minute. And let's look at this. Gain-of-function research. Gain-of-function studies or research that improves the ability of a pathogen to cause disease help define the fundamental nature of the human-pathogen interactions, thereby enabling assessment of the pandemic potential. What? Of emerging infectious agents, informing public health and preparedness efforts, and furthered medical countermeasure development. In just a few words, it is the act of weaponizing disease, pathogens. So you think that this and this are merely coincidences? And so when I posted a couple of videos about how to strengthen your immune system to protect yourself against COVID-19, what did YouTube do? But they took those videos down. What am I supposed to believe? What are you supposed to believe? When eugenics has been in the heart of America since the late 1800s? Eugenics breeders believed American society was not yet ready to implement an organized lethal solution. Who was it that they were planning on getting rid of again? Who was it? Negroes, Jews, and Italians? Let me show you something. Hope I didn't delete it. Anti-Defamation League, right? Good Jewish website. So in the midst of ongoing nationwide protests in response to the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer, an internet rumor has been circulating accusing Black Lives Matter of distributing anti-Semitic flyers. The flyer reads, "Ending white privilege intersects with ending Jewish privilege," and claims that Jewish Americans receive special privileges at leading universities. Challenging white privilege and Jewish privilege is not anti-Semitic, it is not defamatory, does not insult anyone, it is social justice, the flyer says. It also includes the hashtags Black Lives Matter, We Are All Muslim, and white privilege. I'll continue. Eugenics breeders believe American society was not ready to implement an organized lethal solution, but many mental institutions and doctors practice improvised medical lethality and passive euthanasia on their own. One institution in Lincoln Illinois fed its incoming patients milk from tubercular cows, believing a eugenically strong individual would be immune. Folks, you should by now, after reading all of this, be suspicious of the government and this COVID-19 scandal. Something is not right. Something is in the works here, folks, that's going to blow up in the government's face. And I'm not talking about just the United States government, I'm talking about all the governments around the world. It's going to blow up in their face. I believe they created this for eugenics purposes, and they lost control of it. It's not acting like they thought it should. It's not doing what they thought it would. Anyway, as time goes on, we'll see. One institution in Lincoln, Illinois, fed its incoming patients milk from tubercular cows, believing a eugenically strong individual would be immune. 30 to 40% annual death rates resulted at Lincoln. Some doctors practice passive eugenicide, one newborn infant at a time. Other doctors at mental institutions engage in lethal neglect. So you trust your doctor in the hospitals, do you? So when the governor of New York ordered COVID-19 patients back into nursing homes, wiping out much of the population of the nursing homes in New York, eugenics perhaps? Nonetheless, with eugenicide marginalized, the main solution for eugenicists was the rapid expansion of forced segregation and sterilization, as well as more marriage restrictions. California led the nation, performing nearly all sterilization procedures with little or no due process. In its first 25 years of eugenics legislation, California sterilized 9,872 individuals, mostly women. Many were classified as bad girls, diagnosed as passionate, oversexed, or sexually wayward. At Sonoma, some women were sterilized because what was deemed as an abnormally large clitoris or labia. In 1933 alone, at least 1,278 coercive sterilizations were performed, 700 of which were on women. The state's two leading sterilization mills in 1933 were Sonoma State Home with 388 operations and Patton State Hospital with 363 operations. Other sterilization centers including Agnews, Mendocino, Napa, Norwalk, Stockton, Pacific Colony State Hospitals. Even the United States Supreme Court endorsed aspects of eugenics with its infamous 1927 decision. Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote, "It is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for a crime or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough." This decision opened the floodgates for thousands to be coercively sterilized or otherwise persecuted as subhuman. Remember, Jews were on this list as subhuman. Years later, the Nazis at the Nuremberg trials quoted Holmes' words in their own defense. Only after eugenics became entrenched in the United States was the campaign transplanted into Germany. In no small measure through the efforts of California eugenicists who published booklets idealizing the sterilization and circulating to German officials and scientists. Hitler studied American eugenics laws. He tried to legitimize his anti-Semitism by medicalizing it and wrapped it in the more palatable pseudoscientific facade of eugenics. Hitler was able to recruit more followers among reasonable Germans by claiming that scientists was on his side. Now, Listen to the politicians today keep talking about science is on my side, as they say. By now, you should start feeling that something very suspect is going on in the world right now. I'll continue. While Hitler's race hatred sprung from his own mind, the intellectual outlines of the eugenics Hitler adopted in 1924 were made in America. During the 20s, Carnegie Institute eugenics scientists cultivated deep personal and professional relationship with Germany's fascist eugenicists. In Mein Kampf, published in 1924, Hitler quoted American eugenic ideology and openly displayed a thorough knowledge of American eugenics. There is today one state, wrote Hitler, in which at least weak beginnings toward a better conception of immigration are noticeable. Of course, it is not our modern German Republic, but the United States. Hitler proudly told his comrades just how closely he followed the progress of the American eugenics movement. I have studied it with great interest, he told a fellow Nazi. The laws of several American states concerning prevention of reproduction by people whose progeny would, in all probability, be of no value or be injurious to the racial stock. Hitler even wrote a fan letter to American eugenicist leader Madison Grant, calling his race-baiting eugenics book, The Passing of the Great Race, his Bible. Hitler's struggle for superior race would be a mad crusade for a master race. Now the American term Nordic was freely exchanged with Germanic or Aryan. No, I'm not Aryan. I do not fit the profile. Race scientists, racial purity, and racial dominance became the driving force behind Hitler's Nazism. Nazi eugenics would ultimately dictate who would be persecuted in a right-dominated Europe, how people would live and how they would die. Nazi doctors would become the unseen generals in Hitler's war against the Jews and other Europeans deemed inferior folks. You know what this was really aimed at, don't you? Come on. There's a lot of high IQ out there. I know you can figure it out. The Jew. They were after the Jew. During the Reich's early years, eugenicists across America welcomed Hitler's plans as logical fulfillment of their own decades of research and efforts. California eugenicists republished Nazi propaganda for American consumption. They also arranged for Nazi scientific exhibits such as August 1934 display of LA County Museum for the annual meeting of the American Public Health Associations. In 1934, as Germany's sterilizations were accelerated beyond 5,000 per month, the California eugenics leader C.M. Goche, upon returning from Germany, jubilantly bragged to a key colleague, "You would be interested to know that your work has played a powerful part in shaping the opinions of the groups of intellectuals who are behind Hitler in this epoch-making program. Everywhere I sense that their opinion has been tremendously stimulated by American thought. I want you, my dear friend, to carry this through with you for the rest of your life, that you have really jolted in the action a great government of 60 million people." That same year, 10 years after Virginia passed the Sterilization Act, Joseph D. Jarnett, superintendent of Virginia's Western State Hospital, observed the Richmond Times-Dispatch, "The Germans are beating us at our own game." More than just providing the scientific roadmap, America funded Germany's eugenics institutions. What this means is America helped Germany exterminate the Jews. Now let that sink in for a minute. By 1926, Rockefeller had donated some $410,000 and almost $4 million in a 21st century money to hundreds of German researchers. In May 1926, Rockefeller awarded $250,000 to the German Psychiatric Institute of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, later to become Kaiser Wilhelm Institution for Psychiatry. Among the leading psychiatrists at the German Psychiatric Institute was Ernst Rudin, who became director and eventually an architect of Hitler's systematic medical repression. Yes, Hillary Healthcare would have been systematic medical repression. Right? Another in the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute's eugenic complex of institutions was the Institute for Brain Research. Since 1915, it operated out of a single room. Everything changed when Rockefeller money arrived in 1929. A grant of $312,000 allowed the Institute to construct a major building and take center stage in Germany's race biology. The Institute received additional grants from the Rockefeller Foundation during the next several years. Leading the Institute once again was Hitler's medical henchman, Ernst Rudin. Rudin's organization became a prime director and recipient of the murderous experimentation and research conducted on Jews, Gypsies, and others. Beginning in 1940, thousands of Germans were taken from old age homes, mental institutions, and other custodial facilities were systematically gassed. That sounds very similar to what's going on in the nursing homes around the country, United States right now, except they've been COVID-19'd. You see. Between 50,000 and 100,000 were eventually killed. Leon Whitney, executive secretary of the American Eugenics Society, declared of Nazism, while we were pussyfooting around, the Germans were calling a spade a spade. A special recipient of the Rockefeller funding was Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Human Heredity, and Eugenics in Berlin. For decades, American eugenicists had craved twins to advance their research into heredity. The Institute was now prepared to undertake such research on an unprecedented level. On May 13, 1932, the Rockefeller Foundation in New York dispatched a radiogram to its Paris office. June meeting, executive committee, $9,000 over a 3-year period to KWG, that's Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, and anthropology for research on twins and effect of later generations of substances toxic for germ plasm. At the time of Rockefeller's endowment, Ottmar Freiherr von Verscher, a hero in American eugenics circles, functioned as the head of the Institute for Anthropology, Human Heredity, and Eugenics. Rockefeller funding of that institute continued both directly and through other research conduits during Verscher's early tenure. In 1935, Verscher left the institute to form a rival eugenics facility in Frankfurt that was much more heralded in the American eugenics press. Research on twins in the Third Reich exploded, backed up by the government decrees. Verscher wrote in Der Urbarts, a eugenics doctor's journal he edited, that Germany's war would yield a total solution to the German problem. Verscher had a long-time assistant. His name was Joseph Mengele. On May 30th, 1943, Mengele arrived at Auschwitz. Verschuer notified the German Research Society, my assistant, Dr. Joseph Mengele, joined me in this branch of research. He is presently employed at the Hauptsturmführer and camp physicians in the Auschwitz concentration camp. Anthropological testing of the most diverse racial groups in this concentration camp is being carried out with permission of the SS Reichsfuhrer Himmler. Mengele began searching the boxcar arrivals for twins. When he found them, he performed beastly experiments, scrupulously wrote up the reports, and sent the paperwork back to Verschuer's Institute for evaluation. Often cadavers, eyes, and other body parts were also dispatched to Berlin's Eugenics Institute. Rockefeller executive never knew of Mengele, with few exceptions. The foundation had ceased all eugenics studies in Nazi-occupied Europe before the war erupted in 1939, but by that time the die had been cast. The talented men Rockefeller, Carnegie financed, the institutions they helped found, the scientists it helped create, took on a scientific momentum of their own. After the war, eugenics was declared a crime against humanity, an act of genocide. Germans were tried, and they cited the California statutes in their defense to no avail. They were found guilty. So my question is, and this thing is long, there's no way I can read this all the way through, folks, on this channel. It's just, I'm not even halfway through yet. But you get the idea. The seed of the Holocaust was planted by the Americans in Germany. I think it was at least 5 years ago where I declared, at least on social media, that I am not an American. I also declared that I am not a Christian. And for both, I said, because if that's what America stands for, and if that's what Christianity stands for, I will have no part of it. Now, you can try to excuse the United States of America's role in the extermination of the Jews all you want to. You do so at your own peril. The United States of America is equally responsible for the extermination of the Jews as Nazi Germany was. And by condemning eugenics as a war crime, when the Americans did it themselves, the Americans condemned themselves. This is why I consider myself not an American, not a Christian, but an Israeli. I stand with the Jews. Now, I will post this article, the link to this article, on down below. The way you can read the rest of it if you want to. But you need to know that the eugenics has not gone away. In fact, I'm here to tell you that what's happening right now with this COVID-19 came from gain-of-function research, which is a nice way of saying eugenics by, by pathogens. Eugenics by pathogens. Researching to improve the ability of a pathogen that causes disease. That's what gain-of-function research is. This is what happened. It wasn't just China. I know they keep saying it's Chinese. Well, it was released out of China. But as I pointed out in previous videos, that several American universities was involved in this particular study, planting coronaviruses in swine to try and manipulating this coronavirus that's in the swine to try to make it jump to humans. Don't listen to what these people say. Watch what they do. And if they'll do it to the old folks in nursing homes, they'll do it to the Jew. Oh, yes, they will. So, you need to think about it. You need to think about what's going on. You need to, if you consider yourself a patriotic American, you might want to rethink that. Because the United States of America is just as guilty as Nazi Germany and the attempted extermination of the Jews.